Wood. Wood, you know, the one thing I have said, people have asked me, what's the state of the wood market? The one good thing is that between us and the trees, more people know how to cut the wood the way we want it. And that was not always the case. It used to be 30, 40 years ago, we would go to big lumber yards and select out of that huge pile of wood those few pieces that were viable to make guitars. And it was always kind of a pain for the people that ran the yards, but they accommodated us because one of the reasons people like to do business with us is it opens the door so they can do business with other people. You know, when they say that they are a preferred vendor of the Martin Guitar Company, other people pay attention to that because they know that we have very high standards. Well, what's happened is that there's another generation of people that know about guitars, about guitar construction, they play the guitar, and they've gotten into the wood business. So they go to where the trees are and where the sawyers are and tell them, if you have this tree that could be appropriate for guitars and you treat it appropriately, you can sell it to the guitar makers for more money than you can sell it to Home Depot. And so the people that are cutting the logs are like, really? Yeah, you can, you know, it isn't all about price, price, price. It's about quality, quality, quality. So that's the good news. The bad news is that there aren't as many trees as there used to be. And we don't use a lot of them, but we use old ones. And, you know, people need to start to think about future generations. I was approached through Greg Paul by, of all people, Greenpeace recently. And Greenpeace, believe it or not, and this, I probably get this story wrong, but apparently, and this goes all the way back to World War II and General MacArthur, during the Japanese Reconstruction period, the Japanese were given subsidized pricing on spruce from Alaska so that they could rebuild Japan after the war. And they used the spruce for housing, for example. Well, that still exists today. That agreement is still in place. And at some point, the politicians in Washington said, well, we've got these Native Alaskans, like Native Americans, they are Native Americans, but they live in Alaska, and rather than make the mistakes we did years ago of relocating them to reservations that are not where they want to be, we need to find some other way to acknowledge the fact that they were there before us. So what they did is they gave them concessions of spruce. And they said, this large block of land that is primarily spruce, although there's hemlock and there's Douglas fir, is yours. And by the way, you can sell it to the Japanese. Win-win. Well, I didn't realize this, but they are clear-cutting the spruce. And I didn't think people clear-cut anymore, but they do. And it was all about generate as much revenue as possible so we can distribute it to the Native Alaskans and everybody's happy. Greenpeace has some really remarkable aerial photographs of what's going on up there. And they're trying to talk to the next generation of Native Americans and say, look, if you keep this up, it's going to be over. And they're like, what do you mean? They're trees, they grow. They said, yeah, they grow. They're not growing as fast as you're cutting. And there were enough of them for the previous 2 generations. Based on our calculations of what we see you're doing, there's not going to be enough for the next generation. So they have enlisted the help of people like me and Bob Taylor and Henry Jeskowitz from Gibson and a couple of other individuals, a gentleman from Fender, to go out and make a public statement about how rare and precious these timbers are, and we need to treat them with the respect they deserve so that we have them for the future. They have no plans on ramming their boat into the Native Alaskan spruce trees. I'm going to make sure of that before I work with them. So you may hear about it, and it's the beginning, I think, of a discussion and an acknowledgement of the fact that the world is getting smaller. Oil, for example. I think they've come to the conclusion that we've used up half of the world's oil. We never did that before. There was always more than half left. And any of you that are boaters or pilots, you know that rule of thumb, a third, a third, a third. You use a third of your gas on the way out. You use a third of your gas on the way back, and you keep a third in reserve. Well, we've already used up half, so we're going to get close to that reserve portion very quickly. I don't know what the answer is. It concerns me. It really does. And you know, if in your own way you can get involved or you can make a statement, you know, I'm going to be the first one to say I don't know of any better use for a good piece of wood than a guitar, because as you may have heard me say, if you take good care of it, it will last longer than you will. But you know, I want to know that Claire is going to be able to stand up here someday and tell your kids about all the great guitars that we're still making out of all the traditional timbers that make the great guitars sound as good as they do.